Hi, I'm Scott, and I want to spend some time showing you how to set up a Python development environment on a Mac so you can jump right into learning the Python language. Python is a popular programming language these days. It's used in many different fields, including in AI and machine learning, though it also has a long history in data science, in tool building, and in general software development. Python is pretty approachable, both for people who are new to programming and for people who already have programming experience in other languages. So it's useful to know how to use Python if you work with data or build software, or if you'd like to get started working with the powerful tools that Python provides us. While learning the Python language is often fairly straightforward, especially at the beginning, getting a computer set up to work with Python can be a little tricky, especially if you're new to programming. So I'd like to spend some time to show you how to set up your computer to work with Python. I have 4 primary goals for this video. First, I'll show you how to make sure a Python interpreter and Python's very helpful standard library are installed on your computer. The Python interpreter is what allows our computer to run Python code, and the Python standard library is a collection of really helpful functions, features, libraries, and other tools that will let us write powerful and useful programs that can run anywhere Python is installed. Second, we'll install and briefly explore Visual Studio Code, which is a software development program we can use to write our Python code. We can also use it to tell the Python interpreter to run our Python code. I'll show you how to install Visual Studio Code extensions to make it easier to work with Python as well. Third, I'll introduce you to virtual environments, which give us a way to create a separate, reproducible environment to run our Python code, or to run other people's Python code. Using a separate, dedicated environment is critical to working with Python outside of very basic tasks, and it's good to get in the habit of using virtual environments all the time. The fourth topic that I want to cover in this video is a quick look at using Jupyter notebooks within Visual Studio Code. Interactive examples and lab notes are often shared as Jupyter notebooks, so it's a good idea to be at least a little bit familiar with them before starting to use them as course materials or tutorials. As we'll see, the ability to use these notebooks relies on some other things that we'll be setting up along the way. There are many different places we might run Python, including in online notebooks or on servers or in containers or things like that. But this video is going to focus on making sure we're set up to use Python directly on our local system. So let's get started with task number 1, installing Python on our system. We can't use Python if we don't have Python after all. macOS does come with Python installed already, but the version it includes is quite old. The system relies on that installation of Python for doing system stuff, and so we'll want to leave that alone. We'll see more about this later on when we look at virtual environments. What we'll do here is install our own version of Python on our system, so we aren't disturbing the system's Python. There's no problem with having 2 or more versions of Python side by side on our computer. We'll start out by visiting python.org in a web browser. Here, I'll find the Downloads area, and then I'll find the Download button to download the current version of Python, which at the time I'm recording this is 3.14.6. If it's a different number when you're following along, that's completely fine, but it's useful to write down what version you're installing, because we'll be using that information later, and it's always good to know what you're using in case you need to do troubleshooting or something like that. I'll click this button. The installer takes a moment to download. And when that's done, I'll find it in my Downloads directory. I'll open it up, and then I'll go through the installer steps here. I don't need to change anything, so I'll just click Continue at each stage. When that's done, I'll click Close. And then I'll move the installer to the trash. We can repeat this installation process when a new version of Python is released, though it's not necessary to constantly stay up to date with every minor new release of Python. I'd like to briefly direct your attention back to the python.org webpage that we were just visiting, and to the Documentation tab right here. There's a lot of helpful resources here that I encourage you to explore. One of these resources is the Python documentation, or Python docs, where you can find a description of every feature and module of the Python standard library. As you're learning Python, this will be a very valuable resource. It even includes a tutorial in case you're learning Python on your own. We can write Python code in many different places, though to get started as we're learning, it's helpful to use a software development tool that allows us to write, check, and run our code all in the same place. Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, is a software development tool that's available for free, and it can run on Windows, on Macs, and on Linux. So let's take a look at installing it here on a Mac. First, I'll open up code.visualstudio.com here in my browser. and then I'll find the download button here. I'll click that, and the installer will start downloading. Once again, I'll find my installer. I'll open it up, and then I'll drag the Visual Studio Code icon onto the application's alias. I'll close this window and eject the installer. Then I'll move to my Applications folder, and I'll find Visual Studio Code. Here I can choose to sign in with GitHub, but I'll click Continue without signing in. I'm given some choices about customizing the view. I'll choose Light 2026, and I'll click Continue. Once I'm done with those screens, I see a welcome screen. This gives us the opportunity to open up a folder where we'll be working. If you don't see this welcome screen, you can open up a folder by going up here to File, and then choosing Open Folder, and navigating to whatever folder you plan to work in. I'll click on Open here, and I'll find a location on my computer where I want to keep my Python working files. This location can be anywhere you'd like, and you can create a new directory or you can use an existing one. I'd recommend avoiding putting your working directory in a location that syncs to the cloud, because that can lead to some issues if the syncing gets confused or something like that. It's usually fine, but it can lead to some strange and hard to troubleshoot problems in some cases. Personally, I like to have my Python work directory right here inside my home directory, because my documents and my desktop are synced to iCloud. To create a working folder, I'll click New Folder, and I'll give it a name, in my case, Python Work. I'll make sure that's selected, and I'll click Open. I'm asked whether I trust the authors of the files in this folder. And yes, I do. So I'll click Yes, I trust the authors. Now I have a workspace, and let's take a moment to explore it. Here on the right, I see my AI chat bar. And while that can be very useful, we won't be focusing on it here. I'll close that by clicking the little X up here in the top right. If I want to bring that back, I can go up to the View menu and choose Chat. On the far left side of the screen, I have some icons that change which view of the application I'm seeing. The one that's selected here is Explorer, and that's this panel here where I'll be able to see my workspace folder and any files and folders within that. The next view is Search, where I can find and also replace text within my workspace. After that is Source Control, which is where we'd work with commits or changes if we're using Git for source control. I'm not going to be using that here, but you might if you start collaborating on a project with others. Below that is the Run and Debug view, which allows us to do some useful troubleshooting of our code if we're looking for problems. And below that is the Extensions view, which is where we'll find and control extensions, which are plugins that add features and capabilities to Visual Studio Code. We'll see more about that in a moment. I'll click back on Explorer. To get started working with Python, I'll create a Python file. To do that, I can either right-click and choose New File, or I can click the New File button up here at the top of the Explorer area. I'll call my new file working.py. The .py file extension will tell VS Code that this is a Python file, and VS Code will offer to install the Python extension if it isn't already installed. The Python extension allows VS Code to provide syntax highlighting, which provides different colors for different parts of the language, as we'll see when we start to dive into the Python language itself. The extension also provides a linter, which checks the correctness of our code and can suggest fixes when something isn't written properly. It also provides IntelliSense for Python, which surfaces notes and documentation about how various Python commands and features work as we type them. And there are a number of other useful features it provides as well. Here in the bottom right of my window, Visual Studio Code is offering to install the Python extension. So I'll click Install. If that didn't show up for you, you can click on the Extensions area over here, search for Python, and install it manually. I'll switch back to my Explorer view, and I'll close this window and the extension window. And I'll move back to my working.py file. I'll zoom in a little bit here with Command+. My file is empty right now, but let's write a very basic Python program to see how things are working. I'll write print, opening parenthesis, and hello in double quotes, And as I do, I can start to see the code assistance features of the Python extension showing me some information and trying to help me out. It's useful to explore these while you're learning, but they can start to get a little bit annoying too, and they can be turned off in the settings under the name Parameter Hints. Once I've finished typing my Python program, I'll save my changes with Command S or by going to the File menu and pressing Save. VS Code knows that this is a Python program, and I can see that by this indicator down here at the bottom that says Python. I could click this and change the mode to another language. Or I could select Python if for some reason VS Code didn't already pick up on the fact that we're trying to use Python here. We need to make sure that if we run our program, we're using the version of Python we installed. And this area over here in the bottom right, with the number, is where we'll do that. I'll click this, and I'll see a menu with some options, showing me all of the Python installations on this machine. Here's the recommended one, which is 3.14.6, and that's the version that we installed. I can see the older version that the system is using down here. But I'll make sure that I'm using the one that matches the version that I installed earlier. And then I'll find the little play button up here in the top right. And I'll click it to run my code. When I do, I see a new panel open up down here called Terminal. What's happening here is that Visual Studio Code is passing my Python program, which has the file path that we see here, over to the Python interpreter that we told it to use. We can see that right here. The interpreter runs our Python script, and then here we see the output of the program, which in this case is hello, printed out here at the console. As you learn Python, you'll find out how to make more interesting programs, but we've just written and run a perfectly functional, if rather boring, Python program. We can close this terminal window to get some of our screen space back, and it'll pop back up if we run the program again using that play button icon. Or we can bring the terminal back by going up to View and choosing Terminal. Visual Studio Code has a lot of features, and we won't be looking at any more of them here. But if you'd like to explore, you can press Command-Shift-P and open up the command palette, where you can search for and find features to run. The third major thing that I want to show you here is how to set up and use a Python virtual environment. Virtual environments act like little individual, separate spaces for our projects, and they're used to keep the Python environments for each of our programs or projects from interfering with each other. When we're getting started with Python, it can be hard to see the benefits of using virtual environments, because they tend to become much more useful once we start adding on third-party modules and things like that. But it's good to get into the habit of using them, and it's important to understand what they are and how they work. While the Python standard library contains a huge amount of useful modules, we'll also sometimes need to use modules from third parties. We'll find these on PyPy, the Python package index, and we'll download them to our system with pip, the Python package manager. One problem we might face, though, is that when modules are downloaded, they're installed within the scope of whatever Python installation we happen to be using. We want to make sure to leave the system Python alone, and it's not a great idea to be adding random packages that one of our programs might use to the installation of Python that another of our programs might use. If we install packages or modules while a virtual environment is active, those packages or modules are installed into a directory in the virtual environment, instead of into the Python installation that we're using. And we can easily create a list of the requirements for a particular program's environment so it can be reproduced later. The process of using a virtual environment looks like this. First, we create a virtual environment for our project either in the terminal or command line, or by using a tool like Visual Studio Code. This creates a directory, usually a hidden directory called .venv, which contains a configuration file and some other scripts. Next, we'll activate the virtual environment so we're working within it. Again, this can be done manually at the command line by using the activate script that's generated for us, or it can be done through a software development tool that we're using. Then when we install new packages, they'll be installed into this virtual environment instead of into the global Python for the whole system. We can also deactivate the environment when we're done using it. Here at the bottom of the window, I'll click on my Python version, and then I'll choose Create Virtual Environment. I'll use the Quick Create option. Once I do, I'm asked whether I want to use this new environment for the workspace folder, and I'll click Yes. That changes this option here, the one that's second to the right. This is the option where I select the interpreter, and here I can see that I'm using Python within my virtual environment. I also have a new directory over here, called .venv. That's where the configuration is, and where modules will be installed if we need to install modules. Now, if I run my Python program again, initially it won't run inside the virtual environment. I'll need to wait a moment here in the terminal for this .venv in parentheses to appear. That indicates that my virtual environment is active within this terminal. And then, if I run the program again, it'll run within the virtual environment. If you don't see that, you can delete old terminal entries and close this panel and run the program again, and it should pick up the virtual environment automatically. If you open up another working directory, VS Code should also pick up the virtual environment from that directory automatically if it has one. While we'll usually work with Python code as a text file within a code editor, as we've been doing so far, it's also common to work with Python using Jupyter Notebooks, which provide a more interactive interface for working with code. Jupyter Notebooks are files with the extension IPyNB, which is short for Interactive Python Notebook. Jupyter Notebooks are often used in education because they allow us to have some useful text combined with code blocks that can be run individually. They're also commonly used as a way to demonstrate a step-by-step process or sketch out a code prototype. And the Jupyter Notebook interface is frequently used within teams to provide a shared environment where collaborators can work together on the same code. I can create a notebook file by just including that extension in the name. Here I'll click to create a new file, and then I'll create working.ipynb. VS Code knows a little bit about notebooks thanks to software included in the Python extension, but we'll need to install some more software as we go. To run a notebook, I need to provide a kernel, and that's where we'll set which Python to use. I'll click on Select Kernel up here in the upper right of the window. I'll find my virtual environment. A Jupyter Notebook can contain text or markdown cells and code cells. I'll make a very basic code cell here, with the same program we saw earlier. And to run this code, I'll click the little play button up in the upper left of this cell. When I do this, I'm asked to install the ipykernel package, so I'll click Install. That'll take just a moment. I'll click Stop, and then I'll run that cell again. And here I can see the output of my program. If I wanted to, I could run the program again, but when I do that, I'll get the same output. If you don't see any output after installing the ipykernel package, you might need to click Restart, and then run your cell again. We can also open up notebooks from other sources and run them on our system. I have an example notebook here in my Downloads directory, and I can add that right to my workspace here by dragging it from the Downloads area into this area of VS Code. Here in this notebook, I can see some of those text-based markdown cells I mentioned. These are often used to share text information, and there are also code cells where our little pieces of code live. I'll run this first cell here, and like before, I can see my output here. I'll run the second, and there's its output. I'll scroll down a little bit here. Jupyter Notebooks are interactive, so we can prompt the user for some input. I'll run this cell, and this asks me for a name. In the box up here, I'll add the name Charlie, and press Enter. Then I see a response. I can run this cell again, and provide different input. And in this case, the program outputs different information in response to that. These notebooks are modular, so we can define things in one cell and then use them in a later cell. That's often used to create a step-by-step process where we do some setup or initial calculations or something, and then in a later cell, we iterate on something or focus on something specific that we can run over and over without having to rerun all the code before it. I encourage you to explore this example file on your own time. While we usually won't use Jupyter Notebooks to build or distribute software or tools, we'll often use them for collaborating around smaller pieces of code, and we'll often see them in documentation and tutorials. While you're learning, it's common to use both regular script files and notebooks for different tasks. Okay, now you should be set up to start learning the Python language. We've followed a lot of steps, but now we have a learning environment all ready to go. We've installed Python, and we've installed and explored Visual Studio Code. We've seen how to create and use virtual environments, and we've explored why they're so important in modern Python development. We've also taken a brief look at how to use Jupyter Notebooks within Visual Studio Code. If you're planning to attend my Python course through Stanford Continuing Studies, I'll see you there. And if you're learning Python using other resources, keep the documentation at docs.python.org in mind, and have fun.